Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon in English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in Volume 6, which is titled The Natural Law of Kamma. We're going to be studying chapters 11 through 20 today. The way that we start with this particular program is that I invite students to be able to read a particular chapter from the book. And once a student has read this, either in Zoom or if you guys would like to join into Zoom, from those of you guys that are in YouTube and Facebook, you can come into Zoom and you can volunteer to read one of these chapters. These chapters are pretty short, sometimes just a paragraph or two, or maybe just a page or page and a half. And as you read these chapters, then everyone else can be learning from that. Then afterwards, I'm going to share some teachings on that particular chapter, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys have related to the chapter. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. And through this method, you can actually gradually learn the original teachings of the Buddha using his original words. It's always best if you study before or after class as well, because in each one of these chapters, you have the original words of the Buddha. You have a reference that takes you back to the Pali Canon, which is where this is sourced from. And then you have words from me that are helping you to be able to integrate this into your day-to-day life. The words of the Buddha are very clear, very concise, and very precise. So we don't need to interpret his words. We just need to study them. But it does help to have a dedicated practitioner and teacher who's guiding you through your journey, because there are certain teachings that the Buddha has that's connected to other teachings. And if you haven't studied the totality of the teachings, you might need to know those other connected teachings in order to understand a specific teaching. So a teacher is kind of like a tour guide, pointing out for you the things that you need to learn and understand, but it's you that's doing the work to learn, examine, and investigate his teachings, to reflect on them, to independently verify them, and then to practice them, to cultivate wisdom and train the mind to be able to awaken to this enlightened mental state, awakening to the natural laws, namely the natural law of Kamma. So it looks like Pat is volunteering to read this first chapter. So I'll go to you, sir, if you'd like to read this one.
Thank you. To do an action. Rahula, when you intend to do an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Would this action that I intend to do with the body lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, with painful results? Would you reflect, if you know this action I intend to do with the body would lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? It is an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, with painful results. Then you definitely should not do such an action with the body. But when you reflect, if you know this action that I intend to do with the body would not lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both, it is a wholesome bodily action with wholesome consequences, with wholesome results. Then you may do such an action with the body. Thank you.
Okay, Pat, thank you. So here we've got a series of 3 different chapters, which is the Buddha helping you to be able to reflect on whether or not something that you're either about to do, that you are doing, or that you have done is going to lead to any particular harm, because his teachings are based on not causing harm to other beings, including this being who you are. Because anytime you're putting out harm through your choices and decisions, this harm is going to come back to you. This is called unwholesome kamma, or unwholesome results. Now, it's important to understand that you can't cause another being to be discontent. For those of you guys that have been studying with me, you know that it's craving, desire, attachment that is causing your discontent feelings. All the anger, sadness, frustration, and all those other feelings are being caused by the mind's own craving, desire, attachment. Whether it's stress or anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, any kind of frustration or irritation, all of that and others is caused by one's own mind. You can't cause someone else to be discontent, but you can cause them harm. When we're talking about causing harm, this is causing harm to someone's material possessions, causing harm to their physical body, like a physical injury, causing harm to their reputation or anything like this. Anytime you're causing these types of harms, this harm is going to come back to you. So it's important that you reflect before you do something. Is this going to cause harm to others? Is it going to cause harm to me? Or is it going to cause harm to both? And if any of those are true, the Buddha is saying that you should avoid doing that particular action. And here he's talking about bodily actions, but normally when he's talking about actions, he's usually talking about bodily, verbal, and mental actions. So you could apply this same teaching not only to bodily actions, but also verbal actions and mental actions too. So if you're getting ready to say something and you're reflecting on your verbal action that you're about to take, and you realize like, if I say that, this could cause harm, let me not say that. Now you can restrain the mind and choose not to say that. And when you do this more and more frequently, and that's bubbling up in your mind of something that you're either going to do with the body, the verbal action, or mental, and you cut that off and you restrain the mind and you pull it back, more and more you're going to get to the point where the mind doesn't come up with those kinds of thoughts. Right now, you might have thoughts that come up into your mind like, I really feel like I want to punch my boss in the face, right? Sometimes you might have that thought that comes up in your mind, and that's just because of the pollutions that are in the mind. But if every time that thought comes up, you do what the Buddha is talking about here is reflect on this and determine whether it would be wise or not, or whether or not it would be causing harm to others, to yourself, or both. If you restrain the mind from doing that and you cut that off and let it go, more and more you're going to purify the mind where you won't even have those thoughts coming up, that you'll just always have loving kindness and compassion in the mind. So the Buddha is talking about how to move from this pollution of mind and these unwise actions that we do towards this transitionary period where you're training the mind and you're restraining it and getting rid of those pollutions, and then ultimately getting to the point where the mind is actually enlightened and you won't have these kinds of thoughts or you won't do these kinds of actions. So this is part of the process of moving in that direction, is reflecting before you do something. Is it going to cause harm to others, to myself, or both? And if so, then refrain from doing that. And then if you notice that there is something that you're intending to do that doesn't cause harm to others, to yourself, or both, then you know that this would be something that you could do because it's not going to produce unwholesome results or unwholesome kamma. That if you have something that's wholesome in the mind and you know it's not causing harm, then you can do it and rest assured that it's not going to produce any unwholesome results, that it's only going to produce wholesome results. Now, in the core central teaching of the Buddha of the Eightfold Path, he's giving you a lot of details about what does cause harm and what doesn't cause harm, but he's not giving you a complete comprehensive list. So that's why he's teaching you something like this that can be applied more generally and more broadly so that you can discern for yourself in what situations would be wise or unwise. Because he wouldn't have been able to share things like, it would be unwise to drag your suitcase through the aisle of an airplane, run over people's feet, and bump into their knees. He wouldn't have been able to tell you that during his lifetime because planes didn't exist. So it doesn't give you a complete comprehensive list of every single thing that could cause harm. But if you reflect on something like this and you know this particular teaching, you know that it's unwise to walk through the aisle of an airplane and drag your suitcase through there. You would like to more consciously and carefully carry your suitcase or roll your suitcase through the aisle of a plane so that you're not causing harm to others, to yourself, or both. So let me know if you guys have questions on this particular discourse. This is volume 6, chapter 11. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now we'll move to chapter 12. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, it looks like Samantha.
While doing an action. Also, Rahula, while you are doing an action with the body, You should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Does this action that I'm doing with the body lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results? When you reflect, if you know, this action that I'm doing with the body leads to my harm, or to the harm of others, or to harm of both, it is an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results. Then you should suspend such a bodily action. But when you reflect, if you know, this action that I'm doing with the body does not lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both. It is a wholesome bodily action, with wholesome consequences, with wholesome results. Then you may continue in such a bodily action.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. So here the Buddha is talking about not only reflecting before you do something, but also while you're doing it, because you might have overlooked something. You might not have had the wisdom prior to doing something to know that it would be unwise to do it. You might discover while you're actually doing something that this thing that you're doing is unwise. And in that situation, you could restrain the mind and stop doing that particular thing, whether it's bodily, verbal, or mental. So let's just say I reflected prior to speaking, and I thought like, this thing that I'm about to say should be just fine. And now I'm starting to talk. I could be mid-sentence and realize, oh my goodness, what I'm saying is so unwise, and this is not going to lead to any beneficial results. It's going to cause harm. You can cut off that in mid-sentence and choose to not say it, rather than just continuing to put the harm out into the world. It's kind of like a oil pipe has busted, and you would like to shut this down as quickly as possible. So if you're in the middle of having a bodily action, a verbal action, or some mental action, and you're noticing that it's going to cause harm to others, to you, or to both, the Buddha is teaching you to stop doing that particular thing. And this would help you to reduce and eliminate any kind of harms that you're putting out, so that way there isn't harm coming back to you. Because what you're doing on this journey to enlightenment, among other things, is you're extinguishing your unwholesome Kamma. You would like to extinguish this. And one of the ways that you extinguish unwholesome Kamma is by producing only wholesome Kamma, by making wiser and wiser and wiser decisions. So if you're in the middle of an unwise decision, whether it's bodily, verbal, or mental, and you notice that, shut that down so that you're not putting out that harm out into the world. And now there's less harm that you're going to have to deal with coming back to you. And this will help you to be able to shut this down and get to the point where you're only making decisions that are wise and that are wholesome. Because if you're reflecting on this and you realize that what you're doing is wise and it's wholesome and it's leading to beneficial results, then you could continue to do that particular thing. And this is part of what you do in order to cultivate your wisdom around these things. You're going to need to do a lot of reflection before, during, and after certain actions in order to cultivate the wisdom. But then eventually you're going to get to the point where you've cultivated so much wisdom that you can just operate in the world because you just know what is wise in any particular situation. It's kind of like upgrading your mind to a new operating system. That when you're on this old archaic operating system, you have no idea that there's even something better out there because you haven't actually explored it and you haven't looked. But then when you start upgrading your operating system, it's quite challenging. You got to figure out where all the icons are, where all the settings are. You got to figure out where they move things around. And it takes a certain amount of thought and reflection to figure that out. But once you get up and running on that new operating system, it's seamless. You can just flow with your day and make things happen on your computer so easily. And it's the same thing with this, that if you're just getting started on the path, you might not even know that there's something better out there for you, which is this enlightened mental state. But as you start making your way towards enlightenment, it's a little bit cumbersome. It's a little bit difficult. You can find certain challenges along the way, but that's where you have resources and guidance to be able to help you. You can even get to the point where you have certain uncomfortable feelings in your mind where you're not quite sure whether you even made the right decision to go down this path. You might have skepticism in your mind. As these things are occurring, it can be quite challenging transitioning from this old operating system to this new operating system. And you need to reflect and consider whether or not what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis in regards to your wise decisions in terms of your bodily, verbal, and mental actions. You need to be reflecting on those things before, during, and after. And then wherever you see there's harm, to others, to yourself, or both, you refrain from doing that. And now, slowly but surely, after having cultivated more and more wisdom around this, you'll get to the point where you're up and running on that new operating system, and you can just make it happen because you just know what is wise and unwise because you've got that wisdom on board. It's just like you know where all the icons are, where all the settings are on your new operating system, and you can just make it happen. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put this into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. It looks like Samantha has a question here. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you. This is a little bit of a two-parter. The first one is when you're considering saying something to someone, if they're asking for a truthful answer and you know that the answer might be uncomfortable or painful, do you still proceed with that knowing that, you know, how it's received on their end is more their, I don't want to say their responsibility, but it's their discomfort maybe with not liking the answer, or, you know, in knowing that what you're going to say to them could be potentially painful, do you just keep that to yourself?
It all depends. So here what we've got is we've got a teaching that's really broad to be able to kind of apply broadly. But then, you know, you've got right speech in this example that's teaching you about eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. But then in more detail, speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, with a mind of loving kindness. So you make sure you're practicing all of those in all situations. But then there's another teaching that the Buddha has, which I think is back in volume 3, and I can actually look it up for you and send it to you if you like, Samantha, just let me know, where he talks about speech that is agreeable and welcoming to another person. And he talks about if this is agreeable or welcome to another person, and he goes through different criteria, and there are certain situations where he would share it, and there are certain situations where he wouldn't share it. But you need to know the proper time to share something that is disagreeable to an individual. So in some situations, you can share those kinds of things, but you need to be really wise and selective about how you share it. It doesn't mean that you should never share anything that you know that this person is going to receive in a difficult way, but it doesn't mean that you always share it either. There's a proper time and place for these kinds of things. In this teaching where the Buddha talks about this, I'm pretty sure it's in volume 3, and it would be really helpful for you to see that, because once you've got right speech from the Eightfold Path really well taken care of, like the eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech, and then you go in deeper and you work on the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, the next layer in the deeper layer is this one that I'm talking about now.
Okay, I do think I vaguely remember that. I'll go back and look at that chapter. The second thing is, in just reading through your deeper explanation of this chapter, there's a paragraph about understanding about sincerely apologizing for harmful conduct. If you were to inadvertently do something or say something that would be harmful to someone and you realize it, and you offer a sincere and heartfelt apology, does that in some way kind of cancel out the negative Kamma or not? Is it just something that you know that you should do?
It doesn't 100% cancel it out, because you've put out harm, so that is going to affect you. So like, say you have a best friend or a family member and you've said something that is damaging, and let's just say right away you recognize it and you apologize right away. The fact is that you still damaged this relationship to a certain degree, but not doing the apology is going to create more unwholesome Kamma than if you try to come in with the apology. So coming in with the apology is going to help, but it's not going to completely negate it 100%.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Very helpful questions. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any others, so we'll go to the next part, which is the third part of this particular discourse. Would someone like to read this? Okay, looks like Marcy, and then we'll go to Vibha for the next one.
Thank you, Teacher David. Having done an action, also Rahula, After you have done an action with the body, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Does this action that I have done with this body lead to my own harm, or to the harm of others, or to the harm of both? Was it an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results? When you reflect, if you know this action that I have done with the body leads to my own harm, or the harm of others, or the harm of both, it was an unwholesome bodily action with unwholesome consequences, with unwholesome results. Then you should confess such a bodily action, reveal it, lay it open to the teacher or to your wise companions in the holy life. Having confessed it, revealed it, and laid it open, you should undertake restraint for the future. But when you reflect, if you know this action that I have done with the body does not lead to my own harm, or the harm of others, or the harm of both, it was a wholesome bodily action with wholesome consequences, with wholesome results. You can reside peaceful and joyful, training day and night in wholesome states.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. So here the Buddha is saying not only should you reflect before you do something, not only while you're doing it, but after you've done something, look back at it to try to determine whether or not it was wise or unwise. Was it wholesome or unwholesome? Did it lead to your harm, the harm of others, or the harm of both? The way this might look is, say you had a business meeting, or say you had a conversation with a friend or family member, and now you step away from the conversation, is completely over, you step away from the business meeting. You can reflect on what it is that you did during that particular meeting or conversation and look at it and play it out in your mind to see whether there's something that you could have done better. Even if you didn't cause any harm, there's usually improvements where you can tweak and modify and improve what it is that you're doing, which is going to add to your wisdom to be able to do that thing better. So even if you didn't cause any harm, even if it's just like, oh, I could have used these 2 or 3 words, or I could have said that sentence or this sentence, and it would have made that thing that I did even that much better. That's a great practice to have, is that, yes, you're going to spot things, particularly as you're making your way to enlightenment, that need to be improved because there's certain harms and certain unwise decisions, and you're going to need to spot those, and you're going to need to improve upon those. But even as you're making your way to enlightenment, or even when the mind is actually already enlightened and you don't experience any discontentedness anymore, there's this practice of reflecting on what it is that you're doing before you do it, while you're doing it, and after you're doing it, is actually a really helpful thing to be able to work into your life practice. Because even once you're enlightened, there's things that you can tweak to make it even that much better. So it's not like you reach a finish line with the path to enlightenment and then you're done. Instead, you get to that 4th stage of enlightenment where the mind's actually enlightened. You're not experiencing any discontentedness any longer, but you can actually still tweak and improve along the way. So if you build this practice into your day-to-day life where you're reflecting on the things that you are about to do, the things that you're doing, and the things that you have done, this is going to lead to improvement in your day-to-day life. And where you see that you've actually have created some kind of harms, what the Buddha is describing to you here is to, in the words of the translator, confess it to a teacher or a wise companion in the holy life. Here, what the Buddha is basically talking about is he's talking about going to get guidance from somebody that can help you. Sometimes when people see this word confess, particularly if you've been brought up in maybe a Catholic tradition or something like this, you might think of this word in a different way, where, you could potentially think of this in a negative way. But what the Buddha is teaching you here is that it's wise to go talk to somebody that can give you insight and wisdom of how to improve that. Because if you've caused harm in a particular situation, you may or may not know how to improve that. And if you went to your teacher and you shared this, or you went to your wise companions, meaning other members of your community who you have trust and confidence in, and you know that they have a certain amount of wisdom that can help you, then you can share this with them, and then they can give you guidance. And this is helpful for your mind, to humble your mind, but it's also helpful for you to cultivate wisdom to be able to actually improve and make wiser and wiser decisions. So confessing something to a teacher or your wise companions isn't to feel guilty or shameful or get any penalties or punishments. It's to actually receive guidance that's actually going to help you. So that's what the Buddha is teaching you here. And now with that wisdom, you can make improvements for the future. And then as you're making wiser and wiser decisions, and you're noticing that what you're choosing to do doesn't cause harm to yourself, to others, or both, what the Buddha is sharing here is that you can be peaceful and joyful. Because if you've ever laid awake at night ruminating over the things that you've done in a certain day, and you're not quite sure whether or not you did something that was wise or unwise, and maybe you had difficulty sleeping at night, this is because the mind lacks wisdom, and it has certain cravings, desires, attachments, and it's laying there and just obsessively thinking about your day. But when you cultivate enough wisdom that you can go out into the world on a day-by-day basis, and you're making decisions about your conduct that you know with 100% certainty is not causing any harm, you can come home at night and feel completely rested and peaceful and joyful all day long and at night, and you can easily fall asleep because you know you haven't caused any harm and nobody's coming for you. There was a time in my life where I was causing a lot of harm in the world. I had security system around my house with, 10 cameras. I have alarm systems. We'd lock all the doors, double, triple lock all the doors because I was out there causing all kinds of harm in the world. But you can get to a point where you know that you produce so much wholesome Kamma and you're not causing harm, where you might even decide to sleep with your doors unlocked. This is where some people might choose to do. I'm not necessarily suggesting you do that today, but this is where you can ultimately get to, because you know with 100% certainty nobody's coming to harm you, because it's been multiple years that you haven't caused harm to others, and there's no harm coming back to you at all. And this is what you'll be able to see when your mind gets to enlightenment, is that there's no harm coming back to you because you went multiple years not causing harm to others, and any time harm was coming back to you, this old unwholesome Kamma, you just kept extinguishing it and extinguishing it and extinguishing it. And now you'll get to a point where it's been multiple years and you'll see, whoa, there's nothing harmful coming back to me whatsoever. And this is where your mind can be completely peaceful and joyful. If you can remember back to when you were a child, you could probably fall asleep at the drop of a hat, right? Because the mind was fairly pure at that time. Even though there's craving and ignorance in the mind to a certain degree, the mind is fairly pure as a child. But as we age, we adopt all this conditioning, and these pollutions become more and more deeply rooted, and it becomes harder and harder to sleep, for example, or other certain things that you might be challenged with. But this peace and this joy that comes into the mind, one of the reasons why that's occurring, of course, you're eliminating all your pollutions, but one of the reasons why this is occurring is because you have so much wisdom that you've eradicated the ignorance, that fetter of ignorance, that now you can go out into the world and you can wisely make decisions to function in the world without causing harm to others. And this is where your peace and joy comes, because it'll be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. No harm is coming back to you whatsoever. And this is where you can reside peaceful and joyful, because you've trained your mind and you've also gotten to a point where you're only making wise decisions. So let me know if you guys have questions here on this particular chapter. This is chapter 13 of volume 6. All right, looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
David, I was wondering about not having harm come back to you. In your case specifically, I just had a question. If you remember, there was this gentleman who had given a negative review. There was who was talking about the ontological self, whatever that is called. I forget the word. And then he basically gave a negative review on Google for the discussion that happened at the temple. Is that him causing harm to you, or that's harm coming to you because of the discussion you had, or how would you classify that?
Sure. When we talk,
reaction?
oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, so when we talk about there's no unwholesome Kamma coming back to you, there's no harm coming to you, that's not to say that everybody around you is going to do the things that you want them to do or that you prefer for them to do. You're still going to experience certain things. Like last week, I was coming back from the temple and I changed lanes, and there was a car behind me that didn't want me there. He had a certain amount of craving in his mind, and he starts honking his horn and beeping his horn and wanting me out of that lane and coming up alongside of me and winding his window down and gesturing with his hand and all kinds of stuff. So it doesn't mean that you're never going to experience these kinds of things. What it means is that your mind is fully protected, and there was no discontentedness. I wasn't scared, I wasn't fearful, I wasn't worried. These kinds of things are going to happen from time to time, but you're going to notice that it's not affecting your mind. So in the situation where you're an enlightened being existing in the world, you're still existing around people who have craving, desire, attachment, and those people's cravings, desires, attachments can be triggered, and then they could potentially do some kind of harmful action. But that's not harming me. So when that person put the review on the Google website, it didn't harm me. Someone might say, well, he slandered you, that's causing harm. Yeah, he said a particular thing that was slander, but you see that it hasn't affected me whatsoever. That all the students know David. You can see 20, 30 different reviews out there where people are talking nothing but glowing remarks, and there's this one individual who's talking in this way. So it's not causing me any harm. That individual is going to experience the harm of having slandered someone. That's coming back to him. And that person actually wrote me about a week afterwards. And he said everything but apologizing for his actual conduct. And he realized that what he was doing was unwise, but he didn't quite come to the conclusion of, removing it and things like this. But he did talk in ways that he realizes what he did was unwise. So you will experience certain things like this, but it's very minimal and it's very few and it's very far between. And when these things are occurring, it won't have any effect to your mind, and it won't have any effect to what you're doing, because it's going to be so few and far between. Whereas if I was actually doing the things that this gentleman accused me of, you would see bad review after bad review after bad review after bad review, and nobody would be interested in coming to the temple to learn with me. Nobody would be interested in supporting what I'm doing. And that's the unwholesome Kamma of the decisions that I was making. So you're going to run into these kinds of things whenever you're dealing with people that are in the public. They're going to have certain cravings, they're going to get triggered, and then they're going to do things of this nature. I see your hand still up, Vibhav. Did you have more? Okay, you just put it down. Okay. All right. So it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. I have been doing some reading about the Buddha on different topics, but my quick question is Rahula. Does that mean fetter? Is that true? Is that a true statement?
Yeah, this is what that word means. That's the name of his son. And he gave him that name before he was enlightened, right? So he gave this son his name thinking of his son as a fetter. But of course, he's not an actual fetter. But at that particular time, when he wasn't a Buddha, when he was Siddhartha Gautama, unenlightened, he looked at having a child perhaps as something that was hindering him and keeping him held down. And that's why he ultimately needed to leave and go train his mind. And then his son ultimately did come to learn with him. And then his son actually got to enlightenment during his lifetime.
Thank you, Teacher David. Do you have any reference or any guidance to where I could go to actually translate the Pali language? I've come across a few dissertations that are actually in the Pali language, but I would kind of be interested in deciphering those words myself rather than just taking what someone translates them as being. And I'm not sure if you have any guidance of where I could get resources or references to maybe do that.
Sure, there's different places online that you can go to. I don't have them off the top of my head because I don't use them, because the Pali language is no longer a spoken language, so people don't agree on what it actually means. So at this point in time, if you are looking at a discourse and you see English words, and let's just say you go take a Pali word and you put it into this translator, whatever that translator is coming back, you're still trusting whatever that program has been trained to do, because you don't know Pali. It's not something that you know, because it's not a spoken language. So at the end of the day, there needs to be a certain amount of confidence in a teacher that's sharing teachings with you that are going to help you to be able to understand the teachings and actually get to enlightenment. So that work of translating from Pali to English has already been done, and while you're free to go out there and look at it yourself, I would suspect that you're really not actually benefiting anything there, because at the end of the day, you're still translating that or you're still trusting that particular translation, which was coded by a person, and that person was actually doing that. And there's not wide agreement on what these words mean. Like, you can see a particular Pali word that's translated or 4 to 6 different ways, but you can see the translations that I'm using and the word choices that I've updated with. It's cohesive and it's comprehensive, and there's no conflicts amongst the teachings that I'm sharing, so you can have confidence that this is what you need to be able to train their mind to get to enlightenment through understanding the teachings of the Buddha.
Okay, thank you very much, Teacher David. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I would also like to add something for you, Vibhav, since Marcy kind of brought up about Rahula, is that think back to the lifetime of the Buddha. Even though the Buddha was enlightened and he had extinguished all his unwholesome karma, there were still things happening during his life that someone might say, isn't this unwholesome karma? Like, I think it was his cousin that tried to like roll a boulder off of a cliff and kill the Buddha. And then there was that murderer who had murdered 999 people chasing after the Buddha with a sword, right? So in these situations, the Buddha was experiencing these kinds of things. He would even have students that would speak up and disagree with what he had to say and be really angry and frustrated during his classes. So even the Buddha, an enlightened Buddha, that he experienced certain things happening during his life that were, you would probably prefer that these things don't happen. So saying that you're not experiencing unwholesome karma doesn't mean to say that everybody's going to do everything perfectly around you and you're never going to experience the impermanent nature of the world. The impermanent nature of the world is that some people are going to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, and other people aren't in this particular example. So even as an enlightened being, you're still experiencing that impermanence, that some people are going to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, and some people aren't. If you got to enlightenment and everybody was polite, kind, friendly, respectful to you and never said a bad word about you, that would be permanence. So extinguishing your unwholesome karma isn't that people don't do things that you would prefer that they don't do. It's the things that I was just sharing with you is related to your question and giving you the answer there. So you can see that through the life of the Buddha as well. Okay, I don't see any questions on Facebook or YouTube. So now I'm going to go to chapter 14. Is there someone? Oh, this is for you, Vibhav, because you had volunteered earlier. So go ahead, sir.
Do not be judgmental regarding people. The perfectly enlightened one said to Venerable Ananda, by reason of the female household practitioner Megasala states disagreement to the fortunate one that a father Purana was celibate, living apart, abstaining from sexual intercourse, but a paternal uncle, Isidatta, was not celibate, not abstaining from sexual intercourse, but living a contented married life. When they died, the fortunate one had also declared, they attained to the state of a Vansaturna and have been born in the Tusita group of heavenly beings. Judgmental people compare them, saying, this one has just the same qualities as the other, so why is one worse and one better? This will be for their lasting harm and suffering. In this case, the person who is sweet-natured and has listened, learned, comprehended theoretically, and found temporary freedom is better and finer than the other person. Why is that? Because the teaching stream carries them along. But who can know this difference except the Tathagata? Therefore, Ananda, do not be judgmental regarding people. Do not pass judgment on people. Those who pass judgment on people harm themselves. I alone, or one like me, may pass judgment on people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So there's two things to talk about here, and then some of the details as well. So here, the first part of this discourse is that somebody's basically describing two individuals in their family, one who is celibate and functioning a certain way and one who's not. And now certain people are judging those individuals who have died and now saying, you know, what's happened to them in terms of their rebirth. And what the Buddha is saying is that it would be unwise for anybody to do this other than a Tathagata, that it's only a Buddha that would be able to discern what's going to transpire after this person's death. And that's why he says, I alone or one like me, meaning another Buddha, may discern what is going to happen in these situations when people are being reborn. So that's what the Buddha is essentially talking about here. But this word judgment, the way that we use it today is we talk about it in terms of putting yourself above people or below people. considering yourself to be inferior or superior, looking at other people and judging what is wholesome or unwholesome for other people, this would be to pass judgment on someone. Like, say that you no longer use drugs and alcohol, but you see somebody else is using drugs and alcohol. If you look down on them in a judgmental way, what the Buddha is explaining to you is this is causing harm to your own mind, right? And it would be unwise for you to be judgmental towards that person. If you see somebody doing something that's unwise in terms of their bodily, verbal, or mental conduct, and you judge that person and look down on them, it would be unwise for you to do this because it's causing harm to your own mind. Even a Buddha, even an enlightened being doesn't do that, doesn't judge people like that, because where that's coming from is the conceit, that arrogance, the pride, the measuring and comparing, putting yourself above or below others. And this is just hindering your mind from being able to have harmonious relationships with all beings. So if we look at these few lines here, addition to what everything else the Buddha talks about, is he's saying here that it's not wise to be judgmental regarding people. Don't pass judgment on them. Those who pass judgment on people harm themselves. And this is what is important to keep in mind. And you can cut this off and let it go, that as you're walking down the street, if you're being judgmental towards another individual and you can see those thoughts coming up in your own mind, you would like to cut that back and cut that back and cut that back. That's why you're practicing breathing mindfulness, meditation, and generosity, to be able to easily cut that off. First, so that you can see it with your mindfulness or your awareness of mind, you can see that judgment coming up, but then you can apply right effort to be able to cut off and let go, because you've been training your mind in breathing mindfulness, meditation, and generosity. And if you do this enough, you'll start to work on eliminating your conceit, along with other things too, to eliminate your conceit. But this is part of stomping out the conceit and destroying it, eradicating it from the mind, is use your mindfulness to be aware whenever it's coming up, and then apply right effort to cut it off and let it go. And eventually you'll get to the point where the mind doesn't do that anymore, because you've essentially rewired the mind. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. This is chapter 14. Do not be judgmental regarding people. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, so let's move to the next one. This is chapter 15. Looks like Pat is volunteering for this one. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. On one, discontentedness is dependently arisen. On one occasion, Ananda, I was residing right here in Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. Then in the morning, I dressed, and taking my bowl and robe, I entered Rajagaha for alms food. Then it occurred to me, it is still too early to walk for alms food in Rajagaha. Let me go to the park of the wanderers of other communities. Then I went to the park of the wanderers of other communities. I exchanged greetings with those wanderers, and when we had concluded our greetings and cordial talk, I sat down to one side. The wanderers then said to me as I was sitting to one side, "Friends, some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created by oneself. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created by another. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness is created both by oneself and by another. Some ascetics and Brahmins, proponents of Kamma, maintain that discontentedness has arisen randomly, being created neither by oneself nor by another. Now, what does the ascetic Gotama say about this? What does he teach? How should we answer if we are to state what has been seen by the ascetic Gotama and not misrepresent him with what is contrary to the truth? And how should we explain in accordance with the teachings so that no reasonable consequence of our assertion would give ground for criticism? I have said, Ananda, that discontentedness is dependently arisen. Dependent on what? Dependent on contact. If one were to speak thus, would be stating what one has said by me and would not misrepresent me with what is contrary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here, there's an individual who is going to talk with other people who are learning from other teachers. Because as you guys have heard me talk, that the Buddha wasn't the only one teaching during his lifetime. We might think that because you might think that everybody would know this is the Buddha and everybody would be interested in studying with him. But during the lifetime of a Buddha, not everybody knows that that person's a Buddha. A Buddha doesn't go around advertising that they're a Buddha. Instead, there were other teachers who were claiming that it was their teachings that lead to enlightenment. So there were various students of other teachers who, all these individuals, the teachings of the Buddha, or the students of the Buddha and the students of these other teachers, would go out and collect food as donations, and then oftentimes they would sit in a certain park or a grove and they would have conversation as they were eating, and they would discuss the certain teachings that they were learning from their different teachers. And here this individual is saying, hey, that they've talked to some other ascetics and Brahmins. Brahmins are those Hindu priests that are proponents of Kamma, meaning that they don't agree that Kamma actually exists, right? That these individuals are thinking that discontentedness is created by one's self, that discontentedness is created by another person, that discontentedness is created by both oneself and another, or that discontentedness is randomly created, neither by oneself or another. Well, discontentedness isn't created by one's self because there isn't a self here. It's created within the mind based in craving, desire, attachment. You've learned this through the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, and all the other teachings that the Buddha shares. But in order for there to be a craving that actually gets triggered, there's a dependency here. And that's what the Buddha is getting to here, is that it's dependent on contact, that there needs to be contact through the six sense bases, through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, or the mind itself. This is part of what you're going to be learning as part of this program, is understanding the six sense bases and how you experience contact through these. And then that's what's triggering a particular craving. Because when you experience contact through the six sense bases, with the mind's craving, it's going to see it as either agreeable contact or disagreeable contact. If it's agreeable contact, the mind's going to get those pleasant feelings, those conditioned pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But when you experience disagreeable contact, you'll experience those painful feelings, the conditional feelings of things like sadness, anger, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and things of this nature. And you can understand this through dependent origination. If you think back to dependent origination that you've learned in Volume 5, that it starts with ignorance, it then goes to volitional formations, then there's consciousness, then there's the six sense bases, then there's contact, then there's a feeling that arises, and then there's the craving right after that. So this is the sequence of events that is occurring. So in order for there to be discontentedness arising, there has to first be a craving within the mind, but then there needs to be contact coming through one of the six sense bases, or all of them perhaps. And now one of the things that the Buddha describes this as is he talks about the six sense bases as doorways to discontentedness. And what you would like to do is you would like to protect the doorways, or you would like to guard the doorways, so that whenever you have contact coming through your six sense bases, you use your mindfulness or awareness of mind to guard the mind. That wherever you see the mind longing, yearning through these six sense bases, that you restrain the mind, cutting off and letting go any longing, yearning through these six sense bases, so that you can eventually get to the point where it's just contact. Even as an enlightened being, you're still experiencing contact through the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself, but there's no cravings within the mind to get triggered to actually produce discontentedness, because you would have purified your mind of all the cravings, desires, attachments. So you're always going to be experiencing contact as long as you're alive and your six sense bases are active. You're going to be experiencing the contact. But if you've gotten rid of your cravings, desires, attachments, you won't experience any discontentedness. So by just having a craving in the mind, that's by itself isn't going to produce discontentedness. There has to be contact through one of the six sense bases, either the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, or the mind itself. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So now we'll move to the next one. Is there someone who would like to read this one? This is chapter 16. Looks like Yusuf would like to read. Go ahead, sir.
walking the middle way, two extremes that should not be followed. Monks, these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness. What two? The pursuit of sensual happiness in sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, not honorable and beneficial, and the pursuit of self-mortification, which is painful, not honorable and beneficial. Without veering towards either of these extremes, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, which gives rise to wisdom, which leads to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what monks is the middle way awakened by the Tathagata, which gives rise to vision, which leads to nibbana, enlightenment. It is the noble eightfold path that is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, this is the Buddha giving a discourse about the middle way, because when he was in the palace, he lived with lots of sensual pleasures, right? He was a prince destined to become a king. He had everything and anything that you could imagine that a rich, wealthy royal family would be able to provide to their son. So he lived that life for 29 years. But then he stepped away from the royal palace and he lived this life of self-mortification for the first 2 years, where he was studying with these two different teachers. They were teaching him to hang himself upside down from trees, lay on beds of nails, pierce his body with metal implements, starve the body. He got to the point where he was on death's doorstep because his mind swung from side to side like this. He wasn't in the middle way. But then ultimately he discovers the middle way. And the middle way is the Eightfold Path. This is what he discovers and ultimately teaches from the age of 35 to 80 so that you can basically dial this into your life, bringing your mind to the middle, eliminating craving, desire, attachment, extinguishing all your unwholesome Kamma, and getting to the point where you're now not veering towards either extremes, but you're in the middle and you're living your life in moderation. So this Eightfold Path is what's going to extinguish all your unwholesome Kamma. That's why this is in this particular book, because one of the ways that you extinguish your unwholesome Kamma is by making wiser and wiser and wiser decisions. It's like that analogy that I give with the garden hose. If you have a garden hose full of mud that's impacted with mud and you hook it up to a faucet and you open up the faucet and you get lots of fresh water into the garden hose, it's going to flush out this mud. Whereas if you stood there and tried to shake this mud out of the garden hose, you're going to have a really hard time to do that. You're not going to get all the mud out that way. In order to get the mud out of the garden hose, you got to flush it out with clean water. So it's the same thing with your life, is that you've made certain unwise decisions in the past, and the way to flush that out is to just put wiser and wiser and wiser decisions into your life. And it's the Eightfold Path that's going to teach you of how to actually do that. So this Eightfold Path, by making the decision to learn it and deeply understand it and practice it, you're actually making wiser and wiser decisions in your day-to-day life. And this is what's ultimately going to produce lots and lots and lots of wholesome Kamma for you through your wise decision making. And as your old unwholesome Kamma is coming back to you, you'll be able to extinguish it now through practicing the Eightfold Path. So let me know what questions you guys have here where the Buddha's advising you to walk the middle way. Because one of the things that you might learn, depending on where you learn from, is people might teach you when you're meditating to be in a particular position. And if you feel pain in your hip or your knee, to just breathe through it. You can see here that the Buddha is not teaching you that this is something that someone has misunderstood about his teachings. You need the body to be comfortable, not luxurious and not painful, but in the middle where it's comfortable. So anytime you see anybody teaching about a rigid meditation position or just breathing through the pain, you can see that they haven't studied deeply to be able to understand what the Buddha is actually teaching on this important topic of the middle way. So it looks like Marcy has a question. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. So my question has to do with the self-mortification. And I understand what you're teaching here about how the Buddha, for 2 years of his practice, he would almost defile the body in a sense, as a way to, perpetuate enlightenment. My question, though, now is about actually the art or the task of tattooing the body now. The mind has not exhibited any craving for tattoos as it has in the past, because I have quite a few of them. But the other day, when I was reflecting upon the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, and it seems to be something that the mind, has having a little bit of a trouble of, recalling it, on a more quicker, rough basis. So the mind had thought about maybe having the 5 factors of, 5 specific words to trigger the 5 factors of well-spoken speech tattooed on the hand, so that it's kind of readily available there as a reminder. But then the mind also thought about, now, is this causing harm to the body? And would this, I can see unwholesome in a sense where, could there could be an infection that could arise by getting the tattoo. So I'm having a little bit of the mind's having a little bit of difficulty of, I don't feel like there's a strong craving at all to have this done. It was just something that I thought that may be a way to have that information a little bit more readily available for the eyes, so that the mind could see it when, they're having conversation and stuff. It's kind of just right there to keep on top.
Sure. So whether someone chooses to have a tattoo or not, it's a personal choice for them. When someone's choosing to get a tattoo, there's typically personal existence view involved, where the mind is seeing this body as being who they are, and they're trying to decorate the body. And this might be where a lot of your previous tattoos came from, where there's that personal existence view, and then of course feeding into sometimes conceits or the arrogance, the pride, the ego, right? And you're working on eliminating those kinds of things. And I can understand your thought here about having this readily available to you, but you might consider other things that won't reinforce personal existence view. And then also you're thinking about the potential harm because of the pain, I guess, that goes through a tattoo, because I've never had a tattoo, but from my understanding is it can be quite painful. You might look at, having it on your phone, like as a wallpaper or as a picture or something like this. And this could be a way for you to have it easily accessible. But whether you choose to put it on as a tattoo or not is a choice for you. But I would encourage you to look at these other options so that you can ensure that there isn't a craving there and that there isn't any personal existence view that's maybe hidden in the corners that you're not seeing.
Okay, yeah. I did have it on my phone for, I actually still have it on my phone, to be honest with you. And I guess it was just more the fact that when I'm in depth in a conversation, I'm not looking at my phone, but my hands are always there in front of me. But I do appreciate your guidance, Teacher David, and I'll take some more time to think about it.
Yeah, ultimately, in order to be able to practice that type of teaching closely, you're going to need to memorize it. So what I used to do is I used to look at the 5 factors of well-spoken speech in the morning. Like after I'd meditate, my mind was quite clear. And before I headed out on my day, I would look at them and refresh my mind of what they are. And then I would have my conversations in the morning. And then at some point after I ate lunch, I would sometimes review them again. And then I would have all my conversations in the afternoon. And then sometimes even in the evening, I would look at it again. And I would ingrain it in my mind to the point where I can remember it. And one of the ways that I taught my son to remember it is the length of the words. That time is like 4 characters, true is 4 characters, and there's alphabetics there, right? That's afterwards. Then the next one's a little bit longer, which is gentle. The next one's a little bit longer, which is beneficial. The next one's a little bit longer, which is a mind of loving kindness. So these kind of methods of remembering things can be helpful, and it can help you really adopt it into the mind and really ingrain it so that you can remember it. Because while I understand your thoughts about having it as a tattoo, ultimately you're going to need to remember it, because if your practice is attached to looking at your hand in order to practice right speech, now you can't practice right speech if you don't have your hand readily available. So let's just say at nighttime, when you are woken up in the middle of the night and you don't have any lights on, you're not going to have access to those 5 factors on the back of your hand. So you're going to need to ingrain it in your mind.
Thank you, Teacher David. That actually gave me some clarity. And I do like the suggestion of having that quick reference card to review in the morning, go about my day, and then maybe having it in the afternoon. So maybe more with my routine of my meditation, maybe I need to dedicate a little bit of time to reviewing that information, maybe prior to or after meditation.
Yeah, you can even do fun stuff like sit down with like a poster-sized piece of paper and some crowns or magic markers and make a poster. Spend like a good half hour, 2 hours like doing this artistic craft project, almost like a child would do. Have fun with it. And then post it on your refrigerator or post it on the back of your bedroom door, someplace that you will typically look, or at the back of your actual door before you go out into the world in your you have it on the back of your door, and you stand there for 30 seconds and you look at that poster at the back of your door before you go out into the world, and you have that fresh in your mind on the way out the door.
Yes. Thank you, Teacher David. Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. That's actually given me a lot to consider. I do like the creative aspect because I do enjoy painting, and maybe I could make that one of my things. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then take a picture and post it on the Facebook group if you like. All right. So it looks like we don't have any more questions. So we'll just go to the next chapter. This is chapter 17. Looks like Yusuf would like to read this one as well. Let me see, Yusuf. I think this one's pretty long. All right. Go ahead, sir.
This is the first time I read two discourses continuously. I used to people always raises their hands to read.
What's that?
I said this is the first time I read two discourses continuously. I used to people always raise their hand to read.
Oh yeah, there's people who will volunteer, so it's good that you interested in reading. You step up and do it.
Okay. Past unwholesome actions cannot be extinguished with the performance of racing asteroids, harshness. Now, Mahanama, on one occasion, I was living at Rajaga on the mountain, Vulture Peak. On that occasion, a number of Nigathas living on the black rock on the slopes of Isgili were practicing continuous standing, rejecting seats, and were experiencing painful, agonizing, precious feeling due to the effort. Then when it was evening, I rose from meditation and went to the Nigathas there. I asked them, friends, why do you practice continuous standing, rejecting seats, and experience painful, agonizing, precious feeling due to effort? When this was said, they replied, friend, the Nigantha Tabuta is there are lots of hard words here, omniscient and all-knowing, and claims to have complete wisdom and vision. Thus, whether I am walking or standing or asleep or awake, wisdom and vision are continuously and uninterruptedly present to me. He says thus, Nigan, thus you have done unwholesome actions in the past, exhaust them with the performance of bestowing ostriness, and when you are here and now restrained in body, speech, and mind, that is doing no unwholesome actions for the future. So by all operating them with asceticism, past actions, and by doing no fresh actions, there will be no consequence in the future. With no consequence in the future, there is the destruction of action. With the destruction of action, there is the destruction of discontentedness. With the destruction of discontentedness, there is the destruction of feeling. With the destruction of feeling, all discontentedness will be extinguished. This is the decline we approve of and accept, and we are satisfied with it. When this was said, I told them, but friends, do you know that you existed in the past and that it is not the case that you did not exist? No, friend. But friend, do you know that you did unwholesome actions in the past and did not abstain from them? No, friend. But friends, do you know that you did such and such unwholesome actions? No, friend. But friends, do you know that so much discontentedness has already been extinguished, or that so much discontentedness has still be extinguished, or that when so much discontentedness has been extinguished, all discontentedness will have been extinguished? No, friend, but friends, do you know what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of unwholesome states is here and now? No, friend. So, friends, it seems that you do not know you existed in the past, and that it is not the case that you did not exist, or that you did unwholesome actions in the past and did not abstain from them, or that you did such unwholesome actions, or that so much discontentedness has already been extinguished, or that so much discontentedness has still to be extinguished, or that when so much discontentedness has been extinguished, all discontentedness will have been extinguished. Or what's the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of unwholesome states is here and now. That being so, those who are murderers, bloody, handed, evil doers in the world, when they are reborn among human beings, go forth into homelessness as nigatan.
Okay, thank you, sir. So let's talk about what the Buddha is talking about here and what he's discussing. So first, what he's saying is that your past unwholesome actions can't be eliminated or exhausted by performing these piercing austerities. Piercing austerities, or this harshness, would be to hang yourself upside down from trees, to lay on beds of nails, to starve yourself. Here, what these individuals were doing is they were standing, and they weren't sitting down. They were just in agonizing pain, just standing there. And essentially what they got to is that their teacher told them that if you just stand here and you absorb this pain, and you're not doing any new actions that is causing harm to others, then you will extinguish your past unwholesome karma, is essentially what this unwise teacher has actually shared with them. And the Buddha knows that this isn't true, that you just can't stand in one place and extinguish your unwholesome karma. This is one of the misunderstandings that some people have. This is where some people go into silent retreats. I've even actually seen some people go a year or two without talking, for example. Or some people go live in a dwelling somewhere or a cave for 10 years or 15 years, and they think they're extinguishing their unwholesome karma because they're not interacting with other people, and they think they're extinguishing their unwholesome karma, but they don't understand that this isn't extinguishing their unwholesome karma. They're having less contact in some situations, or in this case, they're choosing not to go out into the world and interact with other people, but they're not extinguishing the things that have happened in the past by just standing there and being in this agonizing pain. So what the Buddha asked them is these various questions of, did you know these things? And some of the things he asked them about is, do you know that you did unwholesome actions in the past and you did not abstain from them? And people say, no, we don't know that, right? But friends, do you know that you did such and such unwholesome actions? No, we don't know that. So essentially what they're saying is, we don't know what's wise and unwise. We're just standing here out of faith for our teacher, who has told us that if we stand here and we're in agonizing pain, that we're going to extinguish our unwholesome karma. They haven't thought about this themselves. They haven't cultivated the wisdom to know what is true or false, or wise or unwise. So then the Buddha goes further. He says, but friends, do you know that so much discontentedness has already been exhausted, or that so much discontentedness has still to be exhausted, or that when so much discontentedness has been exhausted, all discontentedness will be exhausted? No, they don't know that either. So in this situation, they don't have mindfulness. They don't have awareness of their mind. They don't know how much of their discontentedness they've eliminated, and they don't know how much is still left to be eliminated. All they're doing is just standing there out of belief of their teacher. And then ultimately the Buddha says, but friends, do you know what the abandoning of unwholesome states is, and what the cultivation of wholesome states is here and now? And they say, no, they don't know that. So how would you ever be able to extinguish your unwholesome karma from the past if you don't have the wisdom of the natural law of Kamma. Because now, when you're not standing there any longer, because eventually you're going to stop standing in one spot, you're going to go out into the world and you're going to be making decisions, either wisely or unwisely. Either wholesome or unwholesome results are going to occur because you don't know what is wise or unwise, so you're going to be out in the world with this lack of wisdom, making more unwise decisions and producing more unwholesome results. Just standing in one spot in this agonizing pain isn't going to extinguish what you've done in the past, particularly because you don't have the wisdom to now go out into the world and practice wise decision making. So the Buddha is getting to the heart of this through asking questions. And he's saying, okay, if you've done things like this in the past, which is you've been murderous, bloody-handed, and evildoers, when you're reborn among human beings, you go forth into homelessness within this group of people that are just standing there blindly trying to figure out how to actually extinguish this Kamma through causing this agonizing pain. Essentially, these people are in the human world, but they're actually functioning like hell beings, just standing there in agonizing pain. And he's saying, if you've done these murderous things in the past, you could be reborn into the human world. And when you're reborn in the human world, this is what you're going to experience, is being reborn into a group of people that think this way, that you're going to be extinguishing your unwholesome Kamma by just standing there and being in agonizing pain. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand and ask any questions in Zoom. So it looks like Yusuf has a question here. Do you think it is wise to live in a cave for 15 years? Nope, I don't think that's wise at all. That's why I don't teach silent retreats, because it's like swinging from side to side. If you're out in the world and you don't have any restraint of your mind and you don't have any wisdom of how to do that, your life's like wide open and you're making all kinds of unwise decisions. If your mind swings all the way to the other side and you were in a cave for 15 years, everything's shut down and you don't have access to wisdom to be able to cultivate the mind and train the mind. That's either side of the spectrum. What you're interested in doing is coming to this middle way where you can interact in the world and you can learn how to practice things like right speech and right action and right livelihood and things like this. Somebody could go off and stay in a cave for 15 years and they might even get to some degree of peacefulness, but you can't say that they're actually enlightened, and that person wouldn't be able to say themselves that they're actually enlightened, because as soon as they come into the town and they come into the city and they hear the honking horns and people are bumping into them in the street or doing some of the other things that you experience in day-to-day life, their mind experiencing discontentedness in that situation, you can see that they're not enlightened. They can see it for themselves. So in order to get to enlightenment, you need to be able to exist in the world, in all parts of the world, with contentedness and peacefulness, not just in this cave. If you live in this bubble, in this cave, even if you think you got to some degree of peacefulness, you're still in a bubble. You haven't actually experienced living out in the world, that maybe in this environment you feel quite peaceful, but now in these other environments you don't feel peaceful because your cravings are getting triggered. So in that situation, an individual wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment by just living in a cave. And this is one of the misunderstandings that people have about the lifetime of the Buddha, is when they hear that the Buddha went off into the forest, they think that he was completely removed from people and that he never saw an individual. But this isn't actually true, because how would he have gotten food? He needed to eat each and every day. And as an ordained practitioner, someone who was living this life of homelessness, he wasn't cooking his own food. He was reliant on the household practitioners to provide him food. So every single day, he came in contact with people. Even during those 4 years where he was deeply training his mind in the forest, he still came out of the forest in order to collect food from people and be able to eat. So he interacted with people on a daily basis. And this is how he was able to gradually train his mind to be able to get to enlightenment. So going into some kind of silence for an extended period of time isn't going to produce enlightenment. But if you went away for 5 days or 10 days, this can actually help you to be able to see what's going on in your mind. And is there any cravings, desires, attachments? Is there any longing, yearning? Because if you're used to drinking that special cup of something in the morning or eating that special oatmeal in the morning, and now you go off into this retreat for 5 days, which is a silent retreat, and you don't have your phone, you don't have Wi-Fi, you don't have your special pillow, you don't have your oatmeal and that special drink in the morning. Now you can see, is your mind actually attached to these things or not? Is there a longing, yearning for these things? So the work that you're doing to be able to extinguish your cravings, desires, attachments, you can be doing all of that work outside of a retreat environment. And you can get to the point where your mind's quite peaceful and quite joyful, but you might have some dust in the corners that you don't see. So you put your mind into a situation where you might go away to a silent retreat for 5 days or 10 days. But that retreat by itself isn't producing anything that's necessarily beneficial. What it's providing you is the ability to be able to see your cravings, desires, attachments that might exist in the mind. And now, having observed those in that 5 or 10 days, now when you come out of the retreat, you know that you got to move aside this special pillow. You need to stop having that special oatmeal every single day. And you need to start introducing some impermanence into your life around these things that your mind was longing, yearning for. And that's where the real work is happening to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments. The retreat, it was just there to be able to expose to your mind what cravings, desires, attachments you have. But now the real work begins when you're outside the retreat and you go home to be able to shed these attachments that you didn't realize that you necessarily had. And this is something that an individual would only do after they've really learned the teachings extensively and they have a really well-developed practice. Doing this in the first couple of months or the first couple of weeks or even the first year or two of your practice doesn't really make sense. It's better to wait until you've developed your mind, you've got a real deep amount of wisdom under your belt, you've shed a fair amount of your attachments, and now you're looking to see, is there any dust in the corners that I don't see and that I'm not aware of? Let me put my mind in a situation where I've stripped my mind of everything and see what is it longing, yearning for, if anything at all. So let me know what other questions you guys have. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So now we'll go to chapter 18. Is there someone who would like to read this one? This is the long one that I was thinking of. Looks like Yusef, you're offering to read this one. Let me see what it is first. I remember there was a really long one because we may or may not have time to actually read it. Let's see. This is titled Pleasure and Discontentedness Not Only Caused by What Was Done in the Past. Okay, so we're not going to read this one in class because it's quite long, but I can share with you what the Buddha is essentially getting to in this one. Is he's saying that the discontentedness that you're experiencing now in the present moment isn't purely based on what you did in the past. That's not what's actually causing that. So if you guys have read this and you have questions, if you could put up your hands or put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, then I'll be able to help you to be able to answer your questions for you. But I'm going to move on to the next one if nobody has questions on this one. So I see Yusuf and Vibhav, you guys have your hands up. I think that's to volunteer to read this particular discourse. But if you don't have questions here, I'm going to move on to the next one. Let me see, Vibhav, do you have any questions here?
Yes, Teacher David, I've read this multiple times, but it's because it's so long, it's kind of hard to put it together. I thought I got it last time, but maybe just can talk about it a little bit. I think
Yeah, maybe what we can do is we can talk offline so that way we can walk through it together. So if you'd like to stick around after class, or if you'd like to schedule a personal guidance session, if you can't stick around after class, then we can walk through it to make sure you understand what it is that you need to understand. And if there's any other students who would like to stick around, if that's what you choose to do, Vibhav, you guys are all welcome.
Sure.
Okay, let me see if there's anybody anywhere else. Okay, I don't see anyone anywhere else asking questions. So let's move to the next one. This is one of the reasons why it's helpful to read before and or after class, because we're not always going to cover all of them. But now we're going to move into chapter 19. And it looks like Pat is volunteering to read that one. So go ahead, Pat.
Thank you. All that is caused by what was done in the past. Monks, there are these three sectarian tenets which, when questioned, interrogated, and cross-examined by the wise, and taken to their conclusion, will remain stuck in a doctrine of inaction. What are the three? 1, there are, monks, some ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this. Whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by what was done in the past. 2, there are other ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. 3, and there are still other ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pleasure nor pain, all that occurs without a cause or condition. Monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by past deeds. And I said to them, is it true that you, venerable ones, hold such a doctrine and view? When I ask them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, it is due to past deeds that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view. Those who fall back on past deeds as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor do they make an effort in this respect. Since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded. They do not guard the mind, and even the personal designation ascetic could not be legitimately applied to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So this is the beginning of a long discourse where the Buddha goes through 3 different aspects of the natural law of Kamma, and you're going to see the subsequent chapters are helping to fill this out. So he's talking about 3 things that people believe but are not actually true. And the first one is that people hold this view that the discontent feelings that they're experiencing today is based on everything that they did in the past, meaning in their past life, and in the past in this life too. And ultimately what the Buddha is saying is this isn't actually true. This is a belief that a lot of people hold. And I see this a lot in Sri Lanka. People in Sri Lanka think like this, and not just everybody, of course, but certain people. I've heard this kind of thought coming out. So somehow this thought got around. I've seen it in India to some degree, but in Sri Lanka as well. People think that you can't actually get to enlightenment in this life because of all the things that you've done in your past life. And they really are worried about their past life. And they think that that's the reason why they're experiencing what they're experiencing in this life. And what the Buddha is talking about of remaining stuck in this doctrine of inaction is that if you think that everything you're experiencing now is based on the past, well, you can't go back and change your past. So therefore, if someone thought like this, that means you can't fix anything that's going on in your life today, because everything that's going on in your life today is based on in the past. So therefore, there's going to be inaction, meaning that you become complacent and you don't actually do the work that you can do in this life to actually experience enlightenment. So it's important that you understand that the discontentedness that you're experiencing now isn't purely from what's happened in the past, that there's certain past causes and conditions that have led to where you are today. But now today you can make choices and decisions that are purifying your mind and getting to the point where you don't experience discontentedness. The second one that the Buddha is talking about here is that some people hold the doctrine and view that whatever they experience, either pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, is caused by God's creative activity. I see this in a lot of places that are learning and practicing Christianity or Muslim teachings or things like this, that oftentimes people put this significance on God and thinking that everything that they're experiencing is because of God. Of course, not everybody, but there's a certain amount of thought that comes out of these types of populations where the thought becomes that whatever we experience is all because of God. And once again, this is going to promote a doctrine or a view of inaction. Because if it's God, the one who's causing everything that I'm experiencing, then I'm locked in. I'm a robot. How could I ever make anything better about my life if it's God who's deciding what I experience today? And this isn't actually true. And that's what the Buddha ultimately is going to get to throughout these discourses. And then the last one here, the Buddha is talking about people who hold this doctrine in view that whatever they experience in terms of discontentedness, that there is no cause and condition, that there isn't anything that's causing this whatsoever. Again, this is going to breed inaction, because if you don't know what the cause and condition is of your discontentedness, then you would never be able to actually solve it. And this whole path to enlightenment is about eliminating the causes and conditions that are producing these discontent feelings so that you can experience the peace and the joy. And now the Buddha just goes into details of this first one, where he's talking about how he approached these ascetics and Brahmin that hold this doctrine in view about everything that you're experiencing is based on the past. And then when they affirmed this and they said, yes, that's true, he says, well, is it because of your past deeds that today you destroy life, you take what is not given, you indulge in sexual activity, you speak falsehood, you produce argumentative speech, you speak harshly, you indulge in idle chatter? This is part of the unwholesome Kamma that you've studied about in the unwholesome deeds that he talked about in previous discourses. That you might be full of longing, that's craving, desire, attachment. That your mind has ill will, that's the anger, hatred, and ill will. And that you hold wrong view, that's the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. So is it because of the past that you're doing all these unwise things today in terms of your moral conduct? And is it because of the past that you have craving, anger, and ignorance in your mind? And the Buddha is essentially helping them see that this isn't actually the truth, that that's not what actually is the case. And then he says that if somebody falls back on this perspective, that everything that you're experiencing today is based on what you've done in the past, then you couldn't even be considered on the path to enlightenment. Because he says those who fall back on past deeds as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done. Nor do they make an effort in this respect, meaning they have this inaction, this complacency that's set into the mind, because it's like, everything that I'm experiencing is based on the past, so why should I do anything today in order to solve this? And then he says, since they do not apprehend as true and valid anything that should be done or should not be done, they are muddle-minded, meaning their mind is confused, they're lacking concentration, they don't have clarity of mind. They do not guard the mind, meaning they don't have mindfulness and awareness of mind to guard their mind when the discontentedness is arising. They're not guarding their mind and cutting that off and letting it go. And even the personal designation aesthetic could not be legitimately applied to them. If you were an aesthetic during the lifetime of the Buddha, you're on the path to enlightenment. So what the Buddha is saying is, you can't even consider yourself on the path to enlightenment if you think that what you're experiencing is from the past, because that means you haven't even understood the Four Noble Truths. You haven't even understood that it's craving, desire, attachment that's causing this discontentedness. It's not from the past. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that very clearly. So let me know what questions you guys have here. You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. Okay, there's no questions. Oh, looks like Viphav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
No, it's not really a question, but the second part, the God's creative activity, it's pretty much a prevalent view in current Hinduism as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Basically, the prevalent view is that everything is already written by God, so there's not much you can change, and we have to really just bow down to God and pray for any kind of release or any kind of, peacefulness. There's no other way. That's a prevalent view from what from my experience.
Do you have a question for me?
No, just a compliment, sorry.
Oh, okay. Yusuf, do you have a question?
I have interacted with Buddhist practitioners who thinks like you need to have maybe a dozen of past lives when you were practicing like right concentration or right mindfulness before you can achieve enlightenment. Like you can't just achieve enlightenment in one life where you were practicing Buddhism in just that one life. Would this view be right, that you need a dozen of past lives where you were practicing like right concentration till you have a full developed concentration?
That is untrue. And if that was true, that would be permanence, right? So you could come out of the animal world, be reborn into the human world the first time, and still get to enlightenment in that existence. So what you're been exposed to isn't the actual truth.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Vibhav, you have your hand up. Is that from before, or do you have something else?
So it was from before.
Oh, okay, no worries. All right, so let me check our other platforms. Not seeing questions there. So now let's go to this last chapter, which is essentially a continuation of the one that we just saw. And it looks like Yusuf would like to read. Go ahead, sir.
All is caused by God's creative action. Then monks, I approach those ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine and view as this: whatever this person experiences, whether pleasure, pain, or neither pain nor pleasure, all that is caused by God's creative activity. And I said to them, is it true that you venerable ones hold such a doctrine and view? When I asked them this, they affirm it. Then I say to them, in such a case, it is due to God's creative activity that you might destroy life, take what is not given, indulge in sexual activity, speak falsehood, produce argumentative speech, speak harshly, indulge in idle chatter, that you might be full of longing, have a mind of ill will, and hold wrong view. Those who fall back on God's creative activity as the essential truth have no interest to do what should be done and to avoid doing what should not be done, nor they make an effort in this respect, since they do not apprehend as true as valid anything that should be done or should not be done. They are muddle-minded, they do not guard the mind, and even the personal designation ascetic could not be legitimately applied to them.
Okay, thank you, sir. So this is very similar to the last one, the last part, where the Buddha is just calling out that point too, that he's essentially saying exactly the same things related to individuals who think that what they're experiencing is based on God. And if that's the case, he's saying that they're not even really on the path to enlightenment. And their mind is muddled and lacking concentration because they haven't even understood the first teaching of the Four Noble Truths to be able to get to enlightenment. And the Buddha would encounter this with different people who were learning from other teachers. People who were learning deeply with him, they understood the Four Noble Truths, but not everybody was learning with him. So he would encounter people like this, and then they would have conversations, and he would have skillful ways of being able to help them to be able to see things that they weren't necessarily seeing. So it would be unwise to give unsolicited guidance to anybody, but if somebody's asking you questions or things like this, there's skillful ways to be able to help people to understand the practice. And this is what you're seeing here, is the Buddha helping people to be able to see that it's not God who's causing the things that you're experiencing in life, and that you have the ability to make a better life for yourself through training your mind and making wiser and wiser decisions. So let me know what questions you guys have here. It looks like Yusuf has a question, and if there's anyone on Facebook or YouTube that has a question, you can put that into the comment section as well.
When the Buddha say, I approach the ascetics and Brahmins, those ascetics and Brahmins, are they practitioners with Buddha, or they are not?
They are not, because if they were, he would refer to them typically as the noble disciples or noble ones or the wise ones. When he's talking about ascetics and Brahmins who hold such a doctrine in view, they most likely aren't studying with him in this particular case, because they would understand the Four Noble Truths if they were studying closely with him.
Okay, so when he asks them a question, then they may be affirmative or they know. Why does he jump into teaching instead of asking them if they wanted his guidance or not? Like when they say, when I ask them and they affirm it, then I say to them, in such case, and etc.
Yeah, so in such a case, he's asking them another question. So he's asking them another question. This is like a skillful way to teach somebody, is ask them a question. But I don't suggest that you go out and do this, Yusuf, because remember, this is a Buddha. This is a fully, perfectly enlightened one. You're not at that point yet. And that's not your role in the world, is to go out and teach other people.
Just another question. So by him asking a question, he puts details of his teachings in that questions, right? He's still teaching them by the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Now it's understood.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a situation today at a temple where a student came in and we're talking about the remodeling at the temple, and they said, "Did it go well for you?" And I said, "Yeah, it went great." And they said, and they were starting to slander people in Asia and saying, "Oh, it's so hard to find people. They usually promise you a whole lot and then they don't actually deliver." And I said, "Oh, that wasn't my experience." And they're like, "No, no, no, but here in Asia, this is the way it happens." And I said, "Oh, that wasn't my experience." And it's like, "Oh, well, and I said, what I chose to do is I chose to talk with the individuals, look at their plans. I kind of walked through what I did as a person in order to have the wholesome results of having great contractors, because you need to be able to make wise decisions in all parts of your life to be able to experience wholesome results. And one of those things is like, yeah, if you're hiring a contractor to do work, you would like to be able to have the ability to make wise choices about who to do work for you. And if you're making wise choices, you will have a wholesome outcome. Whereas if I didn't have that ability to make wise decisions of who to do work for me, maybe they would have stole the money and ran away, or maybe they wouldn't have done the work that they said they were going to do. But when you have the wisdom of how to look at an individual without judgment and discern whether or not this person's going to do good work for you in this example, then you can have wholesome outcomes. So this person, it sounds like, has had lots of unfortunate situations where he hasn't made wise decisions about who to do work for him, and he hasn't had really good results in Asia about people doing work for him. But it's not because there's a problem with Asia, it's a problem with the way that individual is choosing to make decisions. And when you make decisions wisely, you'll have wholesome results. And this is what the Buddha is essentially getting to here in all of these discourses and all of his teachings, that you need to maintain the responsibility to cultivate wisdom yourself and make wise decisions so that you can have wholesome results. Whereas if we blame what we experience on the outside world, that all the people in Asia don't do good work when it comes to working with them doing construction projects, if we blame it on that, then we never cultivate the wisdom that we need to make wise decisions and then experience wholesome results in our day-to-day life. And this is going to create lots and lots of unwholesome results in our life. But when we maintain the responsibility to see that whatever we experience is a result of our decisions, now we can cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and we will experience improved results, whether it's about your day-to-day relationships or even something like this, like a construction project.
Excuse me, did you advise me not to do such a thing? Because sometimes I do it with people. For example, I met a guy who ended his relationship with a friend of his due to something. So I was asking him, do you think it is his craving, his ignorance and not going through reality, his ill will? He still doesn't know how to make a wise decision. Do you think we can forgive him? So I still do that sometimes. Do you think it is wise or something unwise?
Yeah, what I was saying is I don't advise you try to teach people through asking questions, because in my opinion, I think that you still have a lot of learning that you need to do yourself before you would ever put yourself into a teaching role like what a Buddha would be doing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But if you're asking your friends questions or your family questions to be able to help them to be able to see a better way to do something, you could probably do this on a very basic level. But what the Buddha is talking about here is much more detailed than just those simple things.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere else. So what I'm going to do is just end class by thanking all of you guys for joining, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or maybe you're listening to this on the replay, on the podcast, or something like that. Thank you for being dedicated to learning and practicing these teachings, because it's helping you, it's helping those close to you, and it's helping all of humanity as you're learning and growing and becoming wiser and wiser and making better and better decisions in the world. Next week, we're going to be in the next 10 chapters, which is going to be chapters 21 through 30. So feel free to read those either before or after class, and then you can come to class to study them and get any clarification that you need as part of the class. Tomorrow in our group learning program, we're going to be in Volume 1, Chapter 9, which is titled, What is Kamma and How Does It Affect Me? This is where I'm going to go through the basics of the natural law of Kamma. So it kind of really syncs up to where we are in this program really nicely, where you can learn that through tomorrow's class, either attending live or watching the recording or listening to the recording. So if you would like to attend that, I teach it at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And then tomorrow at 3 p.m. Thai time on Sunday, I'm going to be starting the beginning of our retreat, which is a yearly retreat that I do once a year, which is developing a life practice to attain the first stage of enlightenment. The first 2.5 days is all the foundational teachings that you need in order to really get on the path to enlightenment. And then the last 2.5 days is everything that you need to be able to get to that first stage of enlightenment. And all of these things together are combined to be able to help someone get to the first stage of enlightenment. You won't be in the first stage of enlightenment by the time you finish that retreat, but you'll have all the teachings in that confined period that's going to help you to be able to get to enlightenment. And you're going to need to revisit those things more than one time. So if you'd like to attend that either live or you'd like to listen to the recordings, that's going to be coming up next week, because I'm pretty much going to be doing sessions from 9 a.m. in the morning until 12:30 p.m. Then I'm going to be doing excursions with students from 12:30 to 6:30. And then from 6:30 p.m. until 8:30 p.m., I'm going to be doing another class, another session, which is not something that I will typically do. This is only done once a year for this particular retreat. And then there's another retreat that I do once a year as well. And then, of course, we have courses and programs all throughout the year. So if you'd like to attend any of these are all open and available for you. So thank you all for everything that you do to learn and practice these teachings, and all that you do to support me to be able to share these teachings with you. So thank you very much, and have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Take care. Sawadee ka.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.